We have two sons and two daughters. Our two sons are both officers in the Israeli army. Our oldest son, Yonatan, in the paratroopers, and our youngest son, Daniel, a commander in the tank corps. Both fought on October 7th, Simchat Torah. Daniel was positioned with his tank crew on the Nachal Oz base, where he had been based since June, as part of his what's called a border service. And Yonatan, older son, he is a company commander, has 150 soldiers who he's training then for their basic and advanced training. On that particular Shabbat, he was at home with his then fiancée in our home. By the end of the day, Yonatan had gone really quickly to the front, to the Gaza border, as soon as he heard at 8 in the morning what was going on. And by the end of the day, we actually have had two injured sons. Yonatan was injured and found himself in Soroka Hospital, which we went to visit him after Shabbat, and only by the grace of God was he shot through his thigh, and without hitting any of the main arteries. A number of soldiers died from being shot in the main artery in the leg. It's a very, very dangerous injury. And just by the grace of God, although many soldiers around him were killed and injured, he thankfully was only moderately to lightly injured. I was in fact talking to somebody yesterday who was saying that of the soldiers who came as early as my son did, a very, very large portion of them were either killed or badly wounded. And it's just by the grace of God, because it was a time at, before 9 in the morning when we didn't really know what was going on. And they were literally fighting blind, not knowing where terrorists were, all around the Gaza envelope. So by the grace of God, Yonatan was lightly injured, shot through the thigh in Soroka Hospital. Unfortunately, our youngest son, Daniel, was not as lucky. We found out 6 weeks later that he had also been injured on the day after gallantly and valiantly placing their tank in between the many hundreds, eventually thousands, of between 600 and 1,000 Nukhba terrorists eventually came in the area of Nachal Oz. And at the time, they defended very valiantly for a number of hours until their tank was overrun between the border and Nachal Oz. And unfortunately, our son and two other soldiers were taken hostage. One soldier was killed. His name is Tomer Leibovitz, Zichrono Livracha, who was found in the tank and buried soon thereafterwards. Our son, as mentioned, was injured on the day. We know that somewhere after 9 o'clock in the morning, having been in the tank for a number of hours, the tank was overrun and they were taken hostage. They were declared as missing for 3 weeks and thereafter changed to assumed taken captive and now taken captive. So we have made a decision, the families of the soldiers, to campaign as the family and parents of male soldiers. We know that Hamas wants to leave them to the end. We know that that is their standpoint and they want to exact the highest price. Most of the hostage sort of campaign has not been around soldiers. We were fearful to sort of give Hamas any information. We also took directives and advice from the Ministry of Defense, but we felt that the price of keeping quiet and not saying anything about them is beginning to be more than the price of actually speaking about them, because they're just not spoken about. And we know that the Chayalot, the female soldiers, Hamas has in principle agreed to view not as soldiers, but as females. To cut a long story short, we have decided to campaign, and since that moment, we got together as a group of all the soldiers, and we meet every day, multiple times a day, with whoever will meet us, which is pretty much anyone we ask for. There are 37 or 38 ministers. We meet with them, including the heads of the Mossad and the Shabak and the army and whoever we can. And our aim is to campaign on behalf of our children. That Hamas would like our children to remain to the end doesn't mean that Israel should. Israel has a motto of not leaving, lo mafkirim chayalim. We don't leave soldiers, behind. Really the main challenge that is just this lack of knowing. You just know absolutely nothing. Has your son, God forbid, been deceased from October 7th? Did he recover from his injury and has he been okay since then? And where is he and what's he going through? The call could be, please God, he's been released. Please God, there's information about him and he's healthy. Please God, chas v'shalom. And it's just such a crazy reality. I have by and large found that as we've got to know many of the families, I think the hardest nisayon as a general rule is for the mothers. I've spoken about it quite a lot. And I give the example of my wife and I see it with many other families. You know, one handles this lack of information and concern for our children the way one, I think, has handled it before. I often say I've never been particularly worried about what Daniel eats, even though he's a particular eater, and whether he's hot or cold, even though he doesn't particularly like the cold. Every day in the army, I talk to him about what he's doing in the army and what exercises he's doing and how he's progressing in the army and about leadership, etc. My wife, almost every single day, would speak to Daniel about his eating and his warm and cold, etc. So when that's how you've dealt with it until now, this impossible situation of wondering, I look at my wife and I see the same almost with every family that I encounter, that it's difficult to take a shower without thinking, is your son warm? It's difficult to eat anything and swallow anything without asking, without feeling, just sometimes crying, like, is your son eating or not? And it's a daily and moment to moment struggle of just keeping your mind focused. It's really challenging. And, sometimes I succeed more than others. I'm able, as a general rule, to compartmentalize. But it's really, really challenging. And I think it's this ongoing challenge of just keeping your thoughts in check. Not keeping our thoughts in check doesn't help our son, and it will destroy me. So I think it's a daily struggle to keep our thoughts in the right place and ensure that we are, keeping our thoughts in check. I often think of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he famously says that what he calls the last freedom that nobody can ever take away from a human being is their choice of how to react and specifically what to think in any situation. He said famously that he saw every external and circumstantial freedom taken away from a person, but they still have, even in the impossible situation in the extermination and concentration camps, the courageous choice to think about how to handle things. He famously says that he saw some prisoners give away their last piece of bread, and he saw others steal somebody else's last piece of bread. And ultimately, the moral choices we make and how we choose to think about things, I think, is our final human freedom. And I just feel in this particular situation, we don't have the luxury of not trying to function at our very, very best. And it's excruciating, it is. But I have felt that the human spirit is much stronger than one would think. There's a lot of evidence in psychology that people are a lot more resilient than we think we are, and are able to handle situations that we wouldn't have thought we were able to handle. And as Mrs. Baumel said, and we, God forbid, a million times hope never to be in that situation of the months, years, and decades of this impossible situation. We know that Yaakov Avinu, who over 20 years, his children told him, Taraf Yosef, that Yosef had been eaten by an animal, meaning the children showed him the torn, bloody coat of Joseph, and Jacob assumed that he had been torn apart by an animal, but he didn't know. And therefore, Chazal speak about Jacob's life for those 20 years of just not seeing a body, not having a burial, not knowing what really happened with Yosef. There was always a doubt, to the extent that when Yosef stood before Pharaoh, he said the very, very difficult words of that his days were Ma'atim v'Raim, his parent, father and grandfather, and difficult days. And in no small measure because of the incredible nisayon of not knowing what happened with Yosef for those decades. So it is an excruciating challenge. Thankfully, we have only been through this for less than 150 days. We hope and pray that it'll end very soon. And as I said, we're campaigning very, very hard. It's hard for me to imagine people living like this the way Baumels and other families have, and we hope and pray that that won't be our lot. But for us who are going through this challenge, there's a certain comfort in that you're not suffering alone. You don't have to campaign alone. It's not all dependent on you, meaning there are other people, first and foremost, Imanachi B'Tzara, who literally are in the same tzara as you, and therefore you're going through this with many people, and one's not alone in it, number one. Number two, because it's such an extreme and outrageous, experience, and it's in many ways many of our worst nightmare. We have felt from people across Israel, from every walk of life and across the world, the Jewish world particularly, but also beyond, but certainly the Jewish world, just an incredible sense of empathy and iman u'chibatzara, that we're together in it. And I think for us, the myriads of tefillot and messages, and every single day there's a different message, on multiple messages and initiatives, and healing groups and prayer services and mitzvot and all types of things happening all around Israel and around the world, where we don't feel alone. And I think the aloneness is something really, really challenging. But I think because it's been such a shock and there's so many, there definitely has been this tremendous sense of redemption from loneliness. As painful as it is, we're not going through it alone. The others going through it with us, and everybody on some level is going through it. And I think the many, as I have the privilege of being the chairman of World Mizrahi, and we alone have 5 solidarity groups a week coming here. And so many other organizations are bringing out so many solidarity groups, schools and shuls and organizations. And it's just the sense that I felt of, as painful as it is, and it's been incredibly painful, 2 things that have come out of this have been an incredible self-sacrifice. Our 2 sons put their lives on the line to save people they didn't know, and thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers and civilians did the same on that day, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers subsequently. And this has brought out an incredible steel and determination and self-sacrifice and courage and heroism for the Jewish people of one for all and all for one. And at the same time, it has also brought out an incredible unity. I know we were told by some of the leadership of the military establishment that they know for a fact from documents that they found that Sinwar and the leadership of Hamas did not imagine that there would be such an immediate response after all of the political issues that have been with judicial reform and all the elections for the last number of years. They didn't imagine there would be such an immediate response of people coming from around the world. They didn't think there would be a significant land invasion. They didn't think that it would be for so long. They didn't think it would continue after the first stop. They didn't think it would be going down tunnel by tunnel. So I think we've found in this pain an incredible resilience, unity, courage and determination. And therefore, for me, with all the pain, it gives me tremendous hope and a zchut to feel part of such a people. And despite the pain and difficulty, we unfortunately are part of a people who unfortunately know perhaps more than any other what pain and difficulty is, and are able somehow to bounce back from pain and difficulty with resilience and with hopefulness and never with despair. And with all the pain, I do feel that the zchut of the unity and the tefillot and the afrashot challah and the acts of chesed and the solidarity and the messages, and we hope and pray of feeling ish echad b'lev echad. We hope and pray that all of our children and protect all of our soldiers which are putting their lives on the line, and Bezrat Hashem be able to bring them all back very, very soon and safely, Bezrat Hashem. That although Daniel was declared deceased after 163 days of excruciating waiting and prayer, I'll say, inverted commas, we're lucky in that we actually have a grave. We have a grave, even though Daniel's body is not in the grave, because he was injured. And we knew already in the first few weeks that there was blood in the tank and outside the tank and on a uniform. And after about 5 weeks, the blood was confirmed to be our son, Daniel's blood. And although it was additionally excruciating to know that our son had been injured, because, you now know what chance does he have of survival when he's also injured. I always felt personally that had Daniel survived the first day, that he would have a very good chance of surviving. He's very strong physically, emotionally, mentally. He is somebody who Hamas need alive. He's a soldier and an officer. And I thought
there's a very, very good chance he'll be okay. But the knowledge that he had been injured was very, very painful in and of itself. And also in and of the fact that, we didn't know, what he was going through and what his fate was. But the silver lining in that was, thankfully, we have a blood-drenched uniform. We were able to bury something. The majority of the 40 odd families who have been informed of the death of one of the hostages do not have a burial site. And that is even more excruciating because you have nowhere to go. My wife and I went yesterday to Har Herzl, where Daniel is buried, his uniform and some of the blood in and around the tank. And although his body is not in the grave, thank God we have a tziyun, we have a kever, we have a place to go. Because those who don't, it is even more challenging and difficult to face. So the story of our son, Daniel, is unfolded through us being able to listen after the shiva to the black box of the tank and the recording of the last 2 hours and 16 minutes of Daniel's life. It's quite an unusual, painful experience to listen to the last 2 hours and 16 minutes of one's son's life, knowing how it's going to end. But at the same time, it was a privilege to listen to the last 2 hours and 16 minutes of his life, how the decisions he made and how he conducted himself. We know that Daniel and his tank crew got into their tank at 6:45 in the morning, 10 to 15 minutes after the first barrage of missiles came. We know from the black box of the tank and all the internal communication that for the first 2 hours from 7:15 a.m. on Simchat Torah, 7th of October, until 8:45, Daniel and his tank crew fought with incredible bravery to fend off, both in Nachal Oz base and outside Nachal Oz base, the hordes of the first Nukhba terrorists. Nachal Oz base was one of the worst affected, not one of the worst, it was the worst affected base on the first day in terms of sheer numbers. 54 soldiers were killed in and around Nachal Oz base and 11 taken hostage, which most of them have been declared deceased. Of the 300 soldiers killed throughout the fighting on the first day, 54 were from Nachal Oz, not including, as I said, the hostages. That's a huge number. Hundreds of terrorists poured into Nachal Oz base throughout the morning in order to neutralize the base, knowing that it's the key to the defense of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, Kibbutz Nachal Oz, Kibbutz Sa'ad. So Daniel fought bravely for 2 hours against the first wave, killing many terrorists. He returns to his tank position at 8:45, just outside Nachal Oz base, in fact, just outside Nachal Oz kibbutz, as a protection to the kibbutz. And here's the critical moment. He sees that 50 or 60 Nukhba terrorists riding on motorbikes are now coming in with their RPG missiles, and knowing that each one is a killing machine. He knows that he's the last tank standing in the area. He is the last line of defense. Most of the soldiers have been killed. And therefore, he makes a very critical decision. Many officers have told us that it would have been more than acceptable for Daniel and his crew to stay where they were, to shell and bombard the terrorists. And maybe they would have killed 10 or 20. And that would have been acceptable. They were staying in their tank position. Nobody commanded him to leave his tank position. But Daniel understood intuitively. And when you listen to the recording, it is so clear and obvious. He didn't hesitate for one moment, because the oath that you take as a soldier in the Israeli army, and any army for that matter, is to defend at all costs the country and civilians that you have sworn to protect. And therefore, without a thought, I don't believe, listening to the tape, that Daniel thought he was going to his death. I believe that Daniel thought he was sticking to the mission at hand. He was simply doing what you need to do. Lahavdil, you see in sport, you're getting attacked, you're the defense, and many people run past you, and they pass you, you do everything. You run until you drop, to do everything you can to stop scoring a goal. Lahavdil, in this case, it's not about scoring a goal or a touchdown or netting something, it's about killing people. And therefore, he did anything and everything he could. He left the security of his tank position, he went straight at them, knocking many over, shelling. He had to put his head out of the tank in order to hold the machine gun of the tank that the officer has, and using that machine gun, they warded off and killed many of the terrorists. And towards the end of the battle, at around 9:01, Daniel was shot in the back of the neck. We didn't know he was shot in the back of the neck until he was declared dead, because in the declaration of his death 163 days later, it was based on footage of him on the back of a motorbike in Sajiyah in eastern Gaza City at around 12 noon. And there he has a wound in the back of his neck, and it adds up with the description and the audio of the battle itself. He was definitely badly injured, perhaps mortally wounded, and killed already in the tank. And they literally fought until they could fight no longer. They were shot at RPGs, and it turns out that 3 out of the 4 tank members were killed. Tomer Leibovitz, Hashem Yikum Damo, was found dead in the tank and buried 10 days later on the 17th of October. And Daniel's other tank mate, Itai Chen, who's also an American citizen, whose family are also Americans, they're Israelis, but also Americans. Itai and Daniel were killed probably before they crossed the border, and Itai was declared dead on day 156 and Daniel on day 163. I think I handled the first 163 days better than thereafter, because of the first 163 days, even though it was so excruciating, I somehow was able to hold on to hope and to translate anxiety and angst into action. As long as I could do for Daniel, when I lay awake at night and was fearful, I managed to direct my thoughts towards one thing: what can I do to bring Daniel out of Gaza? And really my life became predominantly, for those 163 days, about doing everything we could to bring him out of Gaza. So somehow, because my comfortable default position is one of action, I was in a comfort zone, although I was in an excruciating comfort zone, but a comfort zone where I was able to take the experiences and direct them towards action. What I found so difficult on day 163, knowing that Daniel had been killed, was now that there was nothing I could do. The finality, spending all of that time, hope is lost and there's nothing I can do. Yes, I can still try to bring his body back, and we are trying, but it's not the same bringing back for burial in a coffin to bring him back alive. And therefore, I feel that because I handled the first 163 days relatively well, I struggled post thereafter, because my very strength and strong point and advantage in being able to direct my angst towards action is the very same pitfall when I couldn't do anything. And therefore that finality, I think I cried on that morning more than I've ever cried before, the morning of the funeral, and that was excruciatingly painful. My wife had a different experience. My wife's most excruciating days were those 163. She just couldn't function. The thought of our son being in Gaza and being tortured, it just was too much. She just couldn't take the angst and anxiety to a place of action. I was the one to take the place of action. It was paralyzing. It was just unimaginable. And I've often said, watching and seeing and experiencing the suffering of my wife is the closest I've been to the deepest human suffering I've ever seen. My wife is particularly close, as mothers are to their children. I was very close to Daniel, but I didn't speak to Daniel every day in the army, a couple of times a week. And when we did speak, we spoke about leadership. We spoke about what he was doing in the army. My wife spoke to him about what he's eating. She spoke to him about what he's wearing. He didn't like the cold at all. He was a very fussy eater. So when she spends her life thinking about Daniel, what he's eating and how he's dressed, so one can only imagine that's what she's thinking about every day and every second in the tunnels of Gaza. That was just kasher minaso, just too difficult to bear, incredibly painful. Yet somehow, my wife told me at the end of Shiva, when I asked her how she's doing on the Shabbos of Shiva, she said, Doron, it's actually easier for me now than it was in the first 163 days. I said, Shell, how can you say that? How can you say that now there's no hope and he's deceased? It's easier. She said, because I don't have to worry. I know now that Hamas didn't have him alive for 1 second. I know, and we know from the video and from the chief rabbi of the army told us, he didn't suffer. He was probably killed instantly. He didn't suffer. He won't suffer. He isn't suffering and he'll never suffer. She said the worry for him was just too much to bear. She said the pain now is her pain. And somehow it feels that her pain she can deal with because it's her pain, and it doesn't in any way reflect the pain and the worry of a child. So certainly I think for my wife, the first few weeks thereafter brought a level of relief. I wouldn't say that that's what she's feeling today, because of course now the juxtaposition of him having been a hostage is no longer as acute. Now it's the reality of him being deceased. So it's incredibly, incredibly painful and sore. But there's no doubt in the transition from day 163 to 164 was very different for me, very different for my wife, and each one of us experiences it and handles it in a different way. During the Shiva, like all the Shiva commemorations of hostage parents and of those who've fallen, there's a tremendous feeling of Am Yisrael. People come from all around Israel and around the world, those who are here, to come and pay their respects and wish their condolences and be Menachem Avel. Many different people come. People who maybe their mission is they've lost children themselves, they've lost soldiers. They come and they share something, they give you something. One of those people came and took me aside at the Shiva. I can't remember his name. I don't know who he is. He came and spoke to me for 2 or 3 minutes, and he said to me the following. He said to me, Doron, I can see that you seem to be handling this, with strength. Yeshar koach. But he said, I want to give you some advice. He said, I want you to know that having been through this, it's not enough that you handle this well. That's just the entry to keep yourself afloat. As we say in there when we get in the airlines, at first, secure yourself and put your mask on, your air mask on before your children, because if you can't look after yourself, you can't look after anyone. But that's not enough. The fact that you've looked after yourself doesn't mean you've looked after your children. That you've just begun to look after. He said, be very mindful of how your wife is handling this. Very, very mindful of how each one of your children is handling it, because each one of them is going to handle it in a different way. And you need to be with them and there for them in their way. It was very profound, and I've been very, very mindful of that. One of my daughters and myself handle this in a way where we're able to have these type of Zooms and speak publicly and process it, carry our heart in our sleeve, so to speak, and are comfortable to process it in a way that others are privy. My wife and one of my daughters is exactly not like that. They're much more private. They prefer to process this with their closest friends. My oldest son, I'm not sure is how much he's able to process this. He was injured in the first day. He was shot through the thigh in Nachal Oz, actually. He was at our home with his fiancée then and wife today, Galia. He left at 8 o'clock in the morning in Yad Binyamin and fought for 6 hours in different places. He was eventually shot in the thigh. We decided to go ahead with the wedding, with all the deliberations, this small wedding. He got married, injured, recovered, and went back into active duty. I think by his own admission, he hasn't had the mind space, the head space to emotionally process this. He's gone back into active duty. So I think each one handles it in their own way, but absolutely, it affects every single person. Israel's very good. I don't know how other countries are, but Israel provides support to all the family members, the social workers who worked with us, work with every family member. There's some type of financial remuneration on a monthly basis from the Ministry of Defense for deceased soldiers to parents and to siblings. I mean, to a less extent siblings. But there's a sense of taking responsibility. And yeah, it affects everyone. It affects grandparents. I think my father, was just absolutely broken, especially in the first 163 days. I feel that my mother handled the first 163 days with less brokenness, but now is more broken. Everybody, this affects so many people in so many ways. And as you also said at the outset, our son hasn't unfortunately yet been buried. Yes, we buried his blood and we were grateful to have a funeral and a grave, but there's still an open wound. We're not only mourning, we're also praying, being active and doing whatever we can to bring back our son, which is very daunting because we see, that we're struggling to bring anyone back. Very few and certainly soldiers, officers are not going to be at the front of any line that Hamas is prepared to entertain. So it's a very harrowing situation, and it does affect each person and each sibling and each grandparent. And, we have to try our best as we are to process it individually, but also together as a family. To just shoulder the pain and the burden with our brothers and sisters in their pain. And that's the most important principle. And that expresses itself in so many ways. Messages that people send, people who've got a connection to people and people who don't. A lady arrived at our door, a young woman, 23 years old, from one of the neighboring yeshuvim, with a challah that she baked and a cake, because she said it's her birthday. And there's a custom to bless on her birthday. We didn't know. She just came and gave my wife a hug and said, I've just come to give you challah for Shabbos and to bless you and been davening for your son. So here's a not so random act of kindness of somebody you don't know, and it's very, very touching. And of course, those who do know as well, sending messages that you're thinking about people, and that's of course very appropriate. There's a lot to daven for, to daven and pray for those who need comfort, healing, for those who need to be returned, the hostages. And then, of course, as you said, it's the also expressing solidarity. The solidarity missions are very meaningful. I've heard from so many soldiers who are injured, and you might have seen it firsthand going to Tel HaShomer, and it makes a tremendous difference when people that you don't know from all over the world come and just give chizuk and give a hug and are there for you and want to do for you. I know soldiers who said just even a card of a few hundred shekels, which nobody expects, but even that, any little thing which lightens their burden in any way, first and foremost, just being there for them, even without any financial assistance, is incredible. And of course, financial assistance is looking for those gaps. Thankfully, we're not, each one's got their own source. My son's injuries recovered from, basically, and our other son is a deceased hostage. So we haven't been through the other excruciating pain of having a very badly injured, for life and maimed son. But there's ongoing support needed there. So for those who are bereaved, there's ongoing need for support. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's otherwise. And certainly for the injured families, just the ongoing challenge of just, being able to function again. So I think being able to, express solidarity, love, concern, and just being there for people through messages, through solidarity missions, through whatever support one can offer is amazing. And of course, identifying gaps, because even though Israel's amazing and the army is amazing and civil society is amazing, there are always gaps and there are always people in need, and everyone is dealing with their challenges. So to find the ways, to do one's research and find the ways that one can assist different people in a way that's meaningful to them financially as well.